Awesome. All right, so I can still see that some people are still joining up, but I do appreciate your attendance today. My name is Cal Sutherland. Some of you may be familiar with me. I've worked with many of you, but really glad to see attendance here spiking. I can see that security is at the top of mind of a lot of organizations. So I hope that this presentation is very helpful. We are going to have a question period. So please feel free to type your questions in the chat as we go through the presentation, and we'll at the end of the call we'll go through the questions and make sure that those go answered. So thank you for that. I think we're pretty much ready to get started. So let's go ahead and introduce you to the speakers today. As I mentioned, I am going to be one of those speakers, but we are very lucky to also have my colleague Kristen Brotherton. Let me just see. It doesn't look like the slides are changing on your screen. Bear with me one second here. Just represent this here. Sorry about that. Here we go. Okay. All right, apologies for that. The screen should be updating now, and you should be able to see the slides. So as I was mentioning, we are lucky to have my colleague Kristen Brotherton from Google. Kristen has over 7 years of experience with Google. She started in operations and then transitioned to sales about 2 years ago. So she's been in the space for quite some time and has a lot of experience to share with us today. I myself have been in the platform for a little bit over 11 years, all within Google Workspace. So I've been talking to large customers, medium customers about security, change management, and all related to Google Workspace. So got a lot of expertise on the call, and hopefully there'll be a lot of information that the audience can take away. Looking at the agenda, what we have planned out for today is Kristen's going to start off and talk a little bit about Google, some of the new products that have been released around security in Google Workspace and are on the roadmap. And then also a little bit about Google's methodology about security and how they do it internally and how we can utilize the tools that are available to us within Google Workspace to have a great security posture. The second area is where I'll start to chime in and talk to you a little bit more about up-to-date information around security. So recent breaches. Some of them are very high level, so you might have heard of some of the companies we're going to be talking about and what we can learn from those breaches. Where could those breaches have been prevented, and what steps you can take as an organization to ensure that you're not affected by these types of new attacks. The last little area here under security, the third area, is where we really dive deeper into Google Workspace as a whole and the tools that are available to you to prevent breaches, but also to be reactive in the case of a breach or an incident. What tools do you have available to you from Google to be able to triage through that? So we're going to cover sort of a proactive way to manage that and then a reactive way as well. So we're going to start off with the Google section on why privacy matters. Let's go ahead and skip over to that slide there. So Google, why privacy matters, and I'll pass it over to Kristen to start talking through some of these slides.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. So just to give you a brief synopsis, Google, what we've done with a number of our technologies on the cloud space is we built Google in the cloud, and we wanted to take what we were doing and bring it to our end customers. And so a lot of this really stems from our experiences, what we've been through, and kind of the things that we've gone through and learned over time. And so one of the big things from a Google side was we were getting attacked all the time, and we needed a way to kind of stop and prevent that. We have one of the largest security teams in terms of cloud infrastructure, and we wanted to be able to bring security not just at particular layers, but at all layers. And so part of that really was, just making sure that we have things in place and understanding really how the technology was working and how the attacks were coming in. And so with that, we built out our initial set of products, and then we realized that doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And so we've really been listening to try and understand what the different compliance measures and things that are happening in each one of these verticals to really start embedding and bringing in some additional features and help you meet those requirements. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk to you today. Really, the biggest thing for Workspace specifically has been the compliance side of stuff. We really want to make sure that we're hitting those specific marks to help you hit your marks. With that, we've added a couple of new features, specifically around trust and labels. On June 14th, we actually announced a number of security enhancements, which will help kind of meet some of those needs. Down below, we actually have a blog, and the post materials from this workshop will actually be, or webinar, will actually be sending that out, so you can dive a little bit deeper into some of these features. With that, I just want to touch on one last point. Google really values end user security. It's something that comes up all the time in our customer conversations. We want to make sure that you're aware, like, we're doing everything we can in our power. Data center security is really one of the big points. I worked in the data centers in my early time at Google. And, I always joke with people that, we have several layers of security, but it even goes down to the data centers where we're having, guards, gates, and even in our Atlanta data center, we actually have a moat that sometimes alligators hang out with. So, we really do cover the grounds in terms of security in that space. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into some of these new features. So first and foremost, we're actually working on client-side encryption beta. A lot of our stuff was, we would manage the keys, we would do the rotations, we would do all of that. But specifically in some of the industries, they were like, hey, we really don't want you to have access to our encryption keys. And so we are adding this piece in to kind of give you that onus on the encryption on the data side. For what it's worth, Google does encrypt your data at every layer, both in transit and at rest. Okay, next slide. Second would be the trust rules for Drive. We understand that sometimes, different pieces of data require different types of security levels. And so we wanted to be able to give access to be able to set those different rules based on those specific constraints. And so we have organizational unit rules, we have group rules. And so whenever you're setting these files or features, you can actually limit internal and external sharing on specific file sets. And we're really working to expand that. I know one of the big things was the copy, share, and download and print. And so we wanted to make sure that we were able to give those in a more global fashion as opposed to just on a per file basis. So that's one of the things that have come up with the trust rules, and it is currently in beta now. So if you are a Workspace user, you can apply to get in on that as well. Next slide. Enhanced data loss prevention and classification with data drive labels. This kind of plays into that same piece. We wanted to be able to add another layer on top of it. So if you don't want to do groups or rules or things along or files specifically, you can actually set labels to specific files and folders now, and you'll be able to specify the rules associated with that label. So you're getting another level of granularity to manage those data pieces. Next slide. Lastly, phishing and malware protection. This is something that's always been incredibly valuable to Google. We, for the longest time, we actually used our security keys, our physical security keys, and we had zero phishing attacks internally within the company. And so we wanted to bring that external to our end users. And so, this is just sitting on top of that extra layer. We're adding new phishing and malware pieces into Google Workspace to give you a little bit more granular control and additional control around the settings and features in that space. Lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about BeyondCorp. It's so relevant right now, given COVID and the remote nature of work at this point. We wanted to be able to give what we have internally to our end users. So when I first started at Google 7 years ago, it wasn't called BeyondCorp at that point, it was something else, but we I remember coming from a company that used a VPN, and logging into that VPN was incredibly painful. It was always slow, having to access VMs. It was incredibly painful to work remotely. And so I was always going into the office because I was just like, I don't want to deal with a VPN. Beyond Corp, day one at Google, I was able to work remotely anywhere in the world from a browser window and not experience those pains that I was having previously. Um, it was really a game changer for me. And so when they decided to release Beyond Corp at Google for cloud users, I was just like, I honestly, this is the biggest game changer for me coming from another company to this company. Like, I can't understand why people wouldn't use this. It is proxy based. It provides a single sign on. It's tied to an individual user. And there are other additional features that Kyle will start to talk about that you can play into this to limit who's accessing from what points. But ultimately, this really provides that zero trust network, ties it to the user, and your data is safe and secure. Access to specific resources is limited based on who's accessing from Beyond Corp. You're able to set secure different levels so people have access to different things from the space. Like it really is a game changer when we're talking about remote work. I can't talk it up enough, to be honest. With that, I'm going to actually hand it back to Cal to talk a little bit more about some of the other features.
Great, and I see some questions coming up, so that's great. And most likely, I think we're going to answer that question as we talk about some of the features. But thank you so much, Kristen. That was great. I think that the slide we're on right now is something definitely to keep at the back of your mind as we go through the next slides. So as Kristen mentioned, Beyond Corp is a methodology. It's a security model. So it's like a best practice for managing security, right? The idea is to manage all the security at the user account and then not have to worry about what network the person's using or what device they're using. If the security is attached to the user level, it doesn't matter what they're using. All the security matters based on what account they're logging into. So that's like the methodology behind it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And if you still have questions, please feel free to add them to the chat as well. So following up on the agenda, the next little area is field insights. So we're going to kind of break it down and talk a little bit more about what we've seen in the space in the past year or so. So what breaches have happened, what kind of metrics we're seeing as far as security, and kind of paint the picture as to why this subject matter is so important and why it continues to be important for many organizations. So why focus on security? Some key takeaways is we can see that for malware and phishing attacks, 91% of the phishing attacks are originated from email, so targeted threats that are being sent to specific users. So, you know, the user themselves continues to be the weakest link in the security chain. And how we can protect ourselves from that is, again, going back to that Beyond Corp and managing security at the user level, but also increasing user education around this as well. And we'll talk about some metrics that we've seen around user education as well. From a malware perspective, similarly, 66% of malware attacks originated from an email as well. So email still is at the high forefront of where a lot of these breaches are occurring. And then coming back to that security posture and user education, 90% of reported breaches were caused by employee negligence or just uneducation. So, you know, making sure that they're properly educated on phishing attacks, what they look like, continues to be very important. Moving on to the next slide, another key metric to understand is that phishing continues to be pretty much at the top of the attack methods that people are using for enterprises, right? So if you look below these four types, so crypto mining, phishing, Trojan, and ransomware, any other types of attacks are 10 times less than these top four, right? So phishing continues to be at the forefront. A couple of years ago, phishing would have been at the top, and you can still see it's really at the forefront. So crypto mining is starting to creep up there, but I think phishing is really something that you want to focus on and ensure that your users are well educated around. Again, some metrics around phishing and ransomware. 86% of organizations have had at least one user try to connect to a phishing site. And just if you're wondering where these metrics are coming from, these are from Cisco, right? So Cisco manages over 620 billion internet requests daily. And from those internet requests, they're able to pull these metrics and understand what kind of security breaches are happening, or just statistical analysis on requests that are happening. So 86% of organizations have had at least one user click on a link to a phishing site, which is pretty high. And 70% of organizations were served malicious browser ads. So they got to a website that might have had a malicious ad. So you can see, you know, most organizations are being affected by this. And what we've seen is many administrators are aware of this and are educating their users, but there's still a pretty high lack of education for end users from a lot of organizations across the board. So let's focus on some specific data breaches, right? So this one's a pretty well-known one. This is very recent. So in 2021, Colonial Pipeline was hacked. It was a pretty big hack because they actually had to shut down the pipeline for a couple of days. So they obviously lost a bunch of money. Much of their information was stolen, and they did end up paying a ransom amount. I believe it was somewhere around $4 million. Uniquely, they were able to get some of that money back, which is very rare in these ransomware attacks, but they still lost like over $1 million, and all the data that was restored was still in the hands of a bad actor, right? So pretty interesting breach there. Another thing is it's believed that this breach occurred through a specific email phishing attack. So again, right back to that user, that single user that could have caused this huge breach. Another breach that also happened in 2021 was the Five Rivers Health Center. So over 155,000 patient data was exposed. This was also reported to be due to a phishing attack through an email. And this was also caused the ransom amount to be paid out. I do not believe that was restored, like they got any money back as well. So some very high level breaches that occurred, and we can still see that you know, the methods to protect yourself from these breaches remains very similar, right? So two-step verification, ensuring that if somebody gets your password, they still can't get in, and all of the other security postures we're going to talk about as well. So some final metrics around ransomware specifically. This is pretty interesting. So both of these graphs have to do with organizations that agreed to pay a ransomware. So what you'll see in 2019, out of the 33% of organizations that agreed to pay the ransomware, 22% actually never even got the data back. So this purple mark means they paid and never got their data. In 2020, we're seeing that the data is being returned when ransomwares are paid. However, you can see this huge increase around organizations that were actually had to pay a second ransomware. So bad actors are getting more and more greedy and are actually asking for second payments. So these ransom attacks are becoming more and more costly to organizations. So this is, again, really at top of mind and beneficial to take the right steps to protect yourself. Again, I talked quickly about user education. There's many mechanisms in Google and other security tools to protect yourselves from these breaches, but user education will always be very important. So we see out of these metrics from Proofpoint that only 53% of organizations are actively training their users on topics that are known, that are related to attacks on the organization. 47% actually do phishing tests, and then 41% deliver targeted phishing tests to like maybe the finance department. So it's not like a global test. Now, keep in mind that another metric I read is that after 4 months, a typical end user will completely forget any phishing education that you've provided to them. And we'll again go back to that. I'll just click this link. So it's not only something that you want to educate your users with, but it's an ongoing piece that should be continued throughout your user base, you know, periodically to make sure that this phishing training stays at top of mind. All right, so moving on to some actual things you can do within Google to further protect yourself and then really take advantage of what Kristen was talking around that beyond corp methodology. How can you really put all the security on the user account and not have to worry what network they're using or what device they're using. Really just focus on the user. Who's logging in? Let's protect it at that level. So let's talk about some proactive tools that you can use within Google. So it's kind of in an order the way I set these slides out. I put it in a way where you'd want to start at that user level and start at that beyond corporate security level, and then trickle down to other layers that Kristen mentioned. So we're going to go from that top level and talk about the Google account and how you can manage that, right? So single sign-on is a big part of Google Workspace. It comes with Cloud Identity Premium, which really allows you to take single sign-on another step further. It allows you to plug in third-party applications, Active Directory applications like VPNs and proxy servers, and other applications that might not support SAML authentication. So not to get too technical on this, the idea is if you're gonna take advantage of Google's amazing security, such as two-step verification, the back-end ability of managing, if somebody's logging in from Canada and then somebody logs in from Japan at the same time, Google has mechanisms around that to flag that as a possible suspicious login. So there's a bunch of mechanisms behind that Google account. You can take advantage of all those Google protections in your other applications by allowing those applications to authenticate through your Google account. So people can log into their Windows machine with their Google account, or they can log into other applications like a Salesforce or a DocuSign using their Google account. And this will allow you to protect yourself, again, at that user level. So if they're logging into their DocuSign account, they'll still have two-step verification from Google protecting that DocuSign account. So implementing single sign-on through Google is highly recommended, especially if you're not already using another solution, such as OneLogin or an Okta. Once you have the user account well locked with single sign-on and you have security protections around the account, you can now look at other layers of security. Sometimes that might be your actual endpoints. So for Windows devices, you can manage those devices. You can set restrictions on them, requiring them to have encryption, requiring them to be on a specific Windows operating system. And those requirements can be, required for you to access your Google account. So you'll have the user account level layer of security, and now you can go on to the device level. Another level of security you can take on these accounts is context-aware access. So you can now set rules on the ability to log into your Google account, maybe requiring the person to be in a specific region. You can say, you have to be in Canada to access your Google Drive account, or you have to be in the US to access your Google Drive account. So you can set those type of restrictions. You can also set restrictions on the device, saying you have to have an encrypted Windows device to access your Drive account. So there's a bunch of different other contexts that you can set around requirements to access your Google account. So we've looked at the user level, we've looked at the device level, and now you can even set other contexts around the network once as another layer. So for other devices, such as mobile devices, you have a bunch of advanced mechanisms. Google has also released a bunch of new features for iOS as well. So the ability to manage Android and iOS devices is fully integrated into your Google Workspace. You can also set similar restrictions on those devices, requiring an encrypted drive, requiring to be on a specific network. All of those things can be set on devices. And really and truly, if you take it back to phishing, if somebody gets access to your password, with all of these other layers of security, just having your password wouldn't do anything, right? You still wouldn't be able to access your account without two-step, without the right device, and all the other features and layers of security we've talked about so far. All right, so the next slide here is using the security sandbox. So the security sandbox is an easy check mark you can select within your Google Workspace, and this will be another increased method of security specifically around malicious executables. So typically ransomware attacks, encryption attacks, those will typically be sent to you through an email as an attachment. Now, if you have this selected, Google will actually run executable attachments on the Google infrastructure first before it's delivered to your domain. So it really makes sure that attachments are fully secure and safe before they're delivered to your users. All right, so another layer of security is actually at the data level. So now you can actually control or set restrictions on what can be shared outside of your domain. So you can now leverage data loss prevention to set rules on your Drive data. Maybe you have types of data that you don't want exposed outside the organization. That might be a project-specific type of file. You might have project keywords, or it might be files that have driver's license information or credit card information. If you want to ensure that those files are not shared externally, you can set proactive rules that will automatically block those types of files from being shared externally or sent through email as well. There's also email data loss prevention. All right, the last proactive step is leveraging the security health check. So whenever I speak to administrators, I always recommend going through the security health check quarterly and making sure you're aligned with Google's best practices. So what this is really just a checklist that will go through your security settings and give you a green check mark if you're aligned with Google's best practice, or you'll get a recommendation icon if there's a change that Google would recommend to further secure your data. So this is a list that you can go through. It'll bring you to the right setting and you can change it and get as many green check marks across the board to align yourself with Google's posture. And then of course, as new features come out, they'll be added to this check, security health. So this is why you'd want to check it like quarterly. So that was a bunch of proactive things you can do right now to further secure your domain and ensure data exfiltration doesn't occur. Now, there are some other tools you have at your disposal for reactive measures. So this is kind of after an incident has occurred, or if you want to investigate a possible incident, these are the tools that are at your disposal from Google. Excuse me. So the first tool I want to talk to you about is the Security Center. So the Security Center is actually 3 different areas within the Google Admin Console. It consists of the security health, which we'll skip because we just talked about that under the proactive area. That was the checklist. But there's 2 other areas that fall into the Security Center that are really great for security kind of reactive tools. So there's the dashboard and the investigation tool. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So looking at the dashboard, this is a great way for your administrators to have a high-level single pane of view of all the activity within your domain. So what that activity might be is what external sharing within Google Drive might be. If there's a bunch of files being shared externally, you'll get metrics on that. And you'll also get a full report that you can dive into and actually see statistics and specific information about each file that's being shared externally. You'll also have tools to revoke that public sharing if it's something that you don't want exposed. You'll also get metrics around email, spam, malware attacks, data loss prevention. You'll get metrics around all of that and reports that you can dive deeper into just to triage possible investigations or incidents. The investigation tool gives a lot of power back to your administrators. So for organizations that are have a smaller IT staff, a lot of the times it's hard for admins to be able to triage through possible incidents. As an example, if there was a phishing attack that occurred and let's say 5 or 10 of your users received this phishing email, as it stands, you might have to reach out to the users and tell them not to open the email or to delete it. The security investigation tool gives your admins power back into their hands. They can actually delete emails straight from your user's inbox if they're malicious. They can delete files or revoke sharing rights from specific Drive files if they've been shared publicly and you want to revoke that. So without having to involve the actual user, your admins can be very reactive very quickly to mitigate any risk in the event of an incident using the security investigation tool. Google Vault is another great tool that you have access to. It allows you to set retention and e-discovery on your Mail, Drive, Google Groups, all the Google Workspace data. So if something is deleted from an inbox or deleted from Google Drive, it will still be retained within Google Vault. Whether or not that's 2, 10, 5, 7 years down the line, you can come back and find an email or a Drive file that was modified or deleted after the fact. So this can be used for if an employee deleted a bunch of things maliciously, or if it was a possible breach, you can leverage Vault to restore data. The main use case is typically for e-discovery, but it is there for data retention as well. So another way that you can ensure that you have access to logs is to export your log activity to another repository. So if you've ever used the email logs, you'll know that those email logs only go back about 90 days. And then after that, you can still get log information, but it's not as detailed. If you wanted to ingest your email logs and have the full detailed email logs for the whole, for 10 years down the line, well, you can have Google just spit out those email logs to another database, such as BigQuery, and that will ingest those logs and keep them at your forever, for as long as you'd like. And so that's it pretty much for proactive and reactive. Now, I know we've talked through a bunch of different settings. Some of you might actually even be following along in the administrative console looking for some of these settings. And I just wanted to touch on the fact that some of the settings are plan specific. So depending on the audience, I know some of you are using Enterprise Plus and will have access to everything that I've talked about. Others might be on Enterprise or Business Plus. So I just wanted to touch on this slide to show you which features are associated with which of SKU or version of Google. So for endpoint management, you'll see most of those features are Enterprise, Standard, and Plus. And then also I wanted to have like a call to action or something to take away from the security audit. So what's next? So you've kind of gone through the security discussion today. We're going to have a question period next. But what can you do to get more information? So for those of you that are new to Google Workspace and are just moving onto the platform or thinking about moving to the platform, you can email info@Suitebriar and we can schedule a specific demonstration where we can talk. I can show my administrative console and walk through each setting. And if you're a longer term Google Workspace user, you might want to schedule a security audit with us as well. So that's a full evaluation from Suitebriar where we'll go through your full cloud, workspace integration and start to assess where there might be areas where you can improve upon. We'll give you a detailed report that walks through next steps, and we'll also set a roadmap with you where we work with you throughout the year to ensure that specific security steps are taken to ensure that you're properly protected. And that's it for the presentation. The last area is really the question area, and I saw a couple of questions come through. So I'll go ahead and take a look at that. Please feel free to raise your hand if you'd prefer to speak, and we can unmute you if you're muted, but I'll take a look at the questions as well. So Mike had a question around BeyondCorp. Does it use two-factor authentication, and if so, what method, right? So it does use Google's two-step verification. Again, BeyondCorp is the methodology of using your Google account as your single source of authentication for Google, for other cloud applications, for pretty much everything. Windows devices, your users would be just using that one Google login to access all of those other applications. And you'd be using Google's two-step verification for that. So as far as what methods is, you could use the USB key, you can use your phone, the basic two-step verification methods. Mike, I hope that answers. Please let me know if there's more questions. Will these slides be available after the presentation? Yes, they definitely will. There are some embedded links. Kristen mentioned there's a blog, a security blog in there that we recommend you take a look at as well. So we'll make sure that you get a copy of the presentation. I see Megan already answered that. Can that be set to unwritten in cases of ransomware? Colin, I apologize. I should have probably stopped at the section you were asking about. Do you want to maybe clarify what specific setting you are referring to? I'll jump back in the slides to see if I can. In reference to Google Vault. Well, you can. Okay, so when you're using Google Vault to look at your Drive data, you can set a date. So you can say, I'm looking for Cal's file, but not only Cal's file, I want Cal's file the way it looked on August of 2020. So I can get that version of the file from that date. So if there was like a ransomware attack that occurred after that, I should be able to still restore that file the way it looked before the attack using the date created. So I think that answers your question. We got hit with ransomware and some of our G Drive docs were encrypted due to sync. When will Google offer a native backup restore tool? So I would have definitely looked at Google Vault to see if those encrypted files were still available as to their version. If you went into Google Vault and said, I want the version before the ransomware attack occurred, because I'm pretty confident you would have been able to get those files back from a Google side of things. I haven't really heard of any plans for Google to build its own backup and restore tool, just because, for one thing, you can restore data up to 25 days. So for Mail and Drive, you can restore up to 25 days. And then you do have Google Vault for after, later. But I think that, Google's cloud infrastructure, they have like all that backend encryption that Kristen mentioned as far as at rest and in transit. It's also obfuscated and there's redundancies around the servers. So as far as like backup, there's like less of a need for that just due to the sharding, the encryption, and all the methods of duplication that they already have on their servers. So I don't think there's plans for a native backup and restore tool, but we are lucky enough to have Kristen on the line. So I'll be quiet and see what she has to say.
Yeah, usually whenever I talk to people in regards to backup and restore, like I've been at Google a long time. I've seen a data center go up in flames, and the whole section of it, we were able to recover all of that data for our customers. It might have taken a little bit of time, but all of it was able to be restored. With that being said, I understand that sometimes you need more of a timely sync and restore, and we do have a number of third-party tools. I can definitely check back and share the information with Megan and Paul if we have any plans to do any native backup and restore tools. I know we've partnered with a number of organizations in this space, specifically around our GCP offerings, as well as our workspace stuff. So let me look into it to see if there's any plans internally. But like Carl mentioned, a lot of times, you're able to restore what you need purely through the console up to 25 days, and then Vault actually will provide you that longer term. In fact, you could set it to indefinite and be able to restore from that point too. So.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah. So how does it protect from phishing emails? So Christian, I'm not sure what specific setting you're referring to, but the whole call, sorry, most of the presentation was methods that you can protect yourself from phishing emails. So let's just break that down. So quickly, there's the proactive method would be to stop those phishing emails from even coming into your domain. So those were the things that we looked at as far as email filtering, setting up data loss prevention. Those are the things that will help you protect yourself from phishing attacks coming in. That said, if you do the other protections, the single sign-on, the cloud identity, two-step verification, context-aware access around which devices can access your Google, those are the real protections, because even if a bad actor had your username and password, there's no possible way they'd be able to get in if you had, say, cloud identity with two-step verification, right? Because they have their password, they log in, then they get to the two-step verification. They can't get that password. Now, in a weird case, maybe they somehow stole the person's phone physically or something and were able to get that two-step verification. Well, you still have other protections, right? You could have a restriction on the account that says they have to be in a certain country, and then that would block their login. Or they have to have an encrypted device or a specific operating system that might block them. You can restrict it to a network. So there's a bunch of mechanisms behind Google that will allow you to just completely block the access, even if they had your password. And of course, Suitebriar is here to talk you through best practices to make sure you're properly configured to have that posture. So I hope that answers your question, Krishna, but if not, feel free to clarify on a specific setting if you want. I'm happy to talk through that. Smer, many of our users review their spam folder and are always freaked out at what they see. Some of these messages are really ridiculous. Does Google intend on taking the step in identifying likely spam and just blocking them entirely? Yeah, so that's a great question. And there's a lot of mechanisms that Google has. So they do blacklist a bunch of emails. Like if you saw the number of emails that Google blacklists on a daily basis, it's insane. I don't even know what the number is. So there is a blacklist, so they just don't, black hole is what I'm trying to say. So they don't go into the inbox at all, which is what you're saying. The second step is the spam folder. And first of all, there's AI behind it. So there's machine learning behind it. So it's an ever-changing filter that will learn what is spam and will eventually black hole those emails. If your users are actively marking things as spam, it will learn and start to associate itself with that. So that's the next level that you can take. And then you also have full customization of your email filter rules as well within the control panel. So if you're getting hit by a specific type of email, we could set up a content compliance rule and just have them black holed by customizing that rule ourselves. So lots of options there, and we can obviously talk through that if you ever wanted to meet with me or one of our Suitebriar specialists. No problem. All right, so really great questions. I'm really happy to see these amazing questions. You know, these are oftentimes conversations that I and the rest of our team have with our user base. So another takeaway is just to know that, you know, Suitebriar is here to help you learn and configure these options as well. So I'll stop there. We're kind of at time, but I'm very open to answering any other questions, or if Kristen or Megan, if you have anything else to add, I'll stop rambling.
One last point to the phishing emails. If you're looking for like a foolproof way, I recommend getting physical keys because it requires a physical touch on the computer in order to open or do specific actions on the computer at that point. And that usually helps with man-in-the-middle attacks and things of that nature in terms of phishing whenever they're looking to log in and get access to accounts, because at that point they actually have to physically touch a button on a computer. The government actually went to this method many, many, many years ago with the CAC cards. You actually had to have a CAC card to put in a computer. And this really helps prevent a lot of those attacks.
That's a great point. And Kristen, I think Google, like most of the Googlers have like USB.
Yeah, we have USB keys, which is so much easier than a CAC card from the government side, because you just put a USB key in and you just touch the USB key every time you want to log into something. It's super easy.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, like Google's had 0 phishing attacks since you implemented it, so that's great.
Yeah, yep.
Really great feedback. Okay, so yeah, I'm happy to stop here unless there's any other questions. We will be providing you with the recording. There will also be this presentation that will be associated with it. Does Suitebriar have any presentations that we can implement into our security compliance other than this one? Google does. Google has a bunch of white papers specifically around this security. It talks about, really dives deeper into that encryption and sharding we talked about. So we can definitely share those with you, Mike. And I believe there's also some presentations we can probably find from Google as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a whole compliance page as well. So if you're interested in some of the compliance things and which products are supported by which compliances, we definitely have that information too. And one thing to note as well is we are working towards a lot of new ones. So as those new ones come out, we usually post that on the front page so you can see which offerings are available from a compliance standpoint.
Perfect, perfect. And Zamir has numerous amazing questions. That's a really great one. So does Google provide security awareness training for staff? So they do provide it for their own staff, but they don't really have a customer-facing training. Suitebriar also does the same. We provide it internally as well. And I'm sure that if you speak to your Suitebriar rep, we offer a lot of customized security training. So we could probably meet your needs around security awareness training for your staff, customized for you. If that's a need that you have from Suitebriar for sure. All right, so I see people are leaving and there's not many other questions. Feel free to ask any final ones. Otherwise, again, we will be providing you with the report and the presentation. I just want to thank Kristen so much for your time. Your Google input has been very helpful, so we always appreciate your time.
Yeah, happy to help.
Awesome. All right, so I think we can end it here. Thanks everyone for your attendance. Thanks a lot, Kosh. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.